Yeah.
Okay.
So everything's ready. Yep.
Okay. So welcome everybody to this first plenary talk at EuroSLA30. It is an honor and a great pleasure for me to be able to introduce you to Professor Kazuya Saito. Kazuya Saito is Associate Professor in Applied Linguistics at University College London in the UK. Professor Saito has a wide range of interests in research in second language acquisition. He's particularly interested in researching how second language learners develop various dimensions of their speech in naturalistic settings, as well as how instruction can help optimize speech learning processes in the classroom. Kazuya has investigated an incredibly wide range of topics in second language acquisition, mainly in the area of speech learning, pronunciation, and perceptual dimensions of second language speech, such as comprehensibility. He has investigated individual differences in proficiency, in aptitude, in auditory processing, the role of experience-related and emotional factors in second language pronunciation development. In fact, there are very few, if any, aspects of second language speech learning that he has not investigated in depth. He has conducted research in the lab, but also, and importantly, in the language classroom. And he has done all this work with many outstanding SLA researchers in the field and many MA and PhD students. As you all know, Kazuya is a very prolific researcher who has published many articles in high impact journals in SLA and cognitive psychology. I would say that his work has had and is constantly, in fact, having a great impact in our field with very important contributions that have helped us gain a better understanding of second language speech learning and acquisition. Kazuya is also very active in many ways in making his research available to the public, disseminating the outcome of his research, and contributing to making SLA research known to society. That is also important. So in today's talk, Professor Saito will tell us about how having a good ear promotes speech acquisition. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Saito. Professor Saito, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your very nice introduction, probably one of the nicest ones I ever had. And yeah, very first of all, I would like to start my presentation with a special thanks and congratulations to the conference organizing committee and an army of students, volunteers for making this landmark event actually happen in reality, despite all the difficulties during COVID times. And obviously, it would be amazing if we were able to actually visit Barcelona, everyone's favorite irresistible city on this planet. And in particular, I have been truly enjoying working with my University of Barcelona colleagues and their students. The atmosphere is vibrant and fantastic. But at the very same time, this online platform has a lot of potential, right? And to be very honest, personally speaking, I actually love to give a lecture online even more than face-to-face, because scholarly conversation can continue to despite any kind of physical constraints, such as time and distance. So I obviously look forward to the Q&A session after this. But time is limited, but you can contact me and we can continue conversation. And most importantly, you can communicate with me through social media, where my response is quite quick. And okay, so let's begin. And for PowerPoint slides and video recording pending conference organizers' approval, I would like to share on my website as well as some other social media outlets where I regularly show up. And before everything, I would like to talk a little bit about myself. I consider myself to be a late second language user of English. So I grew up in Japan. I did all my education all the way up to undergraduate studies in Japan. But at the age of 23, I decided to study abroad as an exchange student in the United States. And I took a lot of classes, and then one of them was linguistics. So here we go. This is a very typical classic story about EuroSLA researchers, but I fell in love with it and decided to continue to get my MA in theoretical linguistics at Syracuse University in New York. And then I converted into a applied linguist, and I did my PhD in Canada. 2015, I got a job at Berkeley College, University of London, where I met my colleague, Professor Jean-Marc Devalle, who introduced me to this EuroSLA community for the first time. Since then, this is my most favorite research group ever. And then recently, I moved to UCL and working with Andrew Vish and Professor Sanchez, very young, vibrant SLA researchers. Therefore, I'm really interested in foreign accents. As you can see, I speak second language English with some detectable Japanese accents. I love this topic. I'm really interested in research on mechanisms underlying foreign accents and the training and etc. And I've been working with a bunch of colleagues all over the world on this topic, second language speech and aptitude. Including a conference organizer, Professor Jomora. And everyone has a different view on this. But what I would like to do today is to present my own view on this. And this may not necessarily concur with even my colleagues' view, but I hope you, audience, will find this topic and also controversy, some kind of controversy, to be interesting and relevant to your research program, and hopefully you will incorporate into your program. Okay, this is what I would do. I will do in this talk. So first of all, I would like to provide you with some snapshot of the subfield in SLA, L2 speech learning. And second of all, I would like to move on to provide you with the up-to-date state-of-the-art review on this topic, second language speech aptitude. And then I would like to introduce you to this emerging paradigm, which considers having a good ear, in academic term, auditory processing, as a very key element of aptitude, specifically for the L2 speech acquisition. And the highlight of my talk is, this is going to be very exciting. I would like to check your aptitude, auditory aptitude. So please look forward to that. Okay, so let's start with some backgrounds on the subfield L2 speech learning. So a bunch of researchers in this subfield L2 speech have been extensively working on what is L2 speech learning by looking at how first language phonetic systems interact to make a lot of influence on second language speech acquisition. A lot of theories, and including a speech learning model, perceptual assimilation model, and structural conformity hypothesis, and optimality theoretic model. And what's in common among these theoretical accounts is that, okay, so L1, L2 distance, this distance will determine the degree of learning difficulty in essence. But another line of researchers have been also working on this topic. Okay, so what matters for the advanced second language speech learning and acquisition? And they have found that not only quantity, how much you're practicing and being exposed to the target language, but also quality. So how often you're using a target language, also with whom you're using a target language. And finally, timing. So how early you have started learning a second language, and also how old you actually arrived in a second language speaking environment for the first time. But then more and more researchers are interested in, is it all about experience? Is there anything else beyond experience that actually explains the outcomes of second language speech acquisition? So I would like to show some of the projects that I did back in Canada, because I saw the exact same situation there. So I recruited a lot of data from more than 300 Japanese residents, immigrants in Canada at that time. And let me just introduce the three of them who probably beautifully represent what I have been talking about. So they're all late bilingual. So they came to Canada after the age of 20. And then, but they had been in Canada for a really long period of time, so that more than 10 years. Very importantly, all of them so committed using English every single day. They're married to Canadians, so using English as a primary language of communication, work, social settings, and home. So those participants with a very similar experience profiles, according to theories, they're supposed to show us a very similar speech proficiency, right? So what I asked them to do was to read aloud and pronounce the English R sounds, which is well known to be very difficult for us Japanese speakers. So then let's see how they pronounce the room, race, read, writes.
Room, race, read, write.
Okay, so according to my Canadian judges, her pronunciation was okay, so possibly R, but it could be L or D. And speaker B.
Room, race, read,
according to my judges,
right.
Probably R. And finally, learner C.
Room, race,
You can hear
read,
native
write.
R. So here you can clearly see that something beyond experience must explain something about the adult second language speech acquisition. And one source of individual variation could be aptitudes. Again, this is the main focus of this talk. So people may end up with a different outcomes of second language speech proficiency because certain L2 learners are talented. They can process second language input more efficiently and or effectively. Therefore, in the end, they'll actually attain relatively high proficiency. So now let's talk about the aptitude and what kind of abilities are relevant to successful second language acquisition. So let's move on to the up-to-date literature review on this topic, especially focusing on second language speech learning. As everyone is aware of this, 50 years of research on this topic have been conducted in the context of L2 grammar and vocabulary. And key researchers include Peter Skin, Paul Mira, and more recently, Xiaofan Li, and actually my colleague, Yuji Suzuki has been doing an excellent job on this. They have provided us with a very thorough, solid framework of aptitudes for grammar vocabulary learning. There are a lot of important dimensions and distinctions, but one of them is the explicit versus implicit. And another could be domain specific versus domain general. However, though, 2015, when Trofimovich et al. Published a review paper on this topic, L2 speech learning and individual differences. And they found out that the aptitude has been extensively, exclusively discussed in the area of grammar vocabulary, but not necessarily a pronunciation. According to them, there has been little systematic research on the relationship between various components of aptitude and L2 pronunciation learning. Therefore, I took the initiative, reading a bunch of publications on this topic, aptitude and L2 speech learning, all the way up to 2021, especially since after 2015, when they published a review article. And in order to create the tentative framework of L2 speech aptitude, I used this suggestion coming from Peter Skin, 2016. According to him, okay, in order to create a framework, is this aptitude, which dimensions of language learning is this aptitude relevant to? Second, is this about domain general or domain specific? And finally, is this about explicit versus implicit learning? So I would like to share with you, here's the tentative summary of L2 speech aptitude that I found. And first dimension, especially related to L2 speech learning, is the segment. Is this about segmental learning or is this about super segmental learning? And as you can see here, the type explicit versus implicit, and finally a domain specific or domain general. And here's individual abilities that I found. So as you can see, not that many studies have been published, but definitely this topic is growing and attracting a lot of attention there. Okay, so now I would like to introduce you to this emerging paradigm of L2 speech aptitude. So more recently, some scholars, including myself, have begun to conceptualize, test, and elaborate on this framework of aptitude for L2 speech learning, but from slightly different angle. So we have a very simple hypothesis that is having a good year in academic term, auditory processing is the root of language acquisition. And this domain general auditory processing ability has been researched very well in the area of L1 acquisition, and it has been linked to various dimensions of L1 acquisition and delay. And we hypothesize that this can also explain, this can be germane to L2 acquisition. All right, so let's start talking about what is it. So it's a domain general perceptual ability to encode fundamental, very basic characteristics of sounds, acoustic signals. So what are they? Pitch, formants, duration, and intensity. And it's conceptualized very much basic, lower order bottom-up processing ability. And because it's the beginning of everything about language acquisition, it's considered to be the gateway to spoken language. And it's probably very straightforward to everyone that this ability, auditory processing, matters for every stage of language acquisition. So phonology, it's obvious that infants need this ability in order to detect the probabilities of individual phonemes in L1 system within the first 8 months of their life. And auditory processing, especially prosodic abilities, are needed in order to help children identify word boundaries and fill in prosodic details. Even when it comes to morphosyntax, again, prosodic abilities really matter. It helps children track syntactic structure and perceive morphosyntactic cues. And what's really interesting about this ability is that psycholinguistics research has also established the developmental trajectory. So basically within first 8 years of your life, your auditory acuity improves dramatically. But then somewhere around 8 to 11 years old, it reaches its peak moment. And then right after that, you go through some kind of dramatic decline. But from the early 20s, as you know, or you may not want to know, we're getting old. So auditory processing ability is gradually, slowly declining throughout the rest of your life. Therefore, researchers in L1 acquisition have also proposed this idea, auditory deficit or precision theory. According to them, it has been claimed that language problems arise from auditory impairments. So if you have auditory problems, okay, it would immediately affect your speech perception, right? And then you end up having a lot of issues with forming phonetic and phonological categories. And therefore, these issues will eventually lead to more global issues such as reading and speaking. So indeed, there is ample research evidence showing that these auditory individual differences could be significantly tied to A1 literacy development. So obviously, children acquire language. Most of them likely have a native like proficiency, but their speed is different. So this speed seems to be very much related to the auditory processing. And second of all, reading difficulty. So the incidence of dyslexia is related to the auditory impairments, and finally, autism. But because auditory precision hypothesis talks about causality here, it also has been subject to controversy. So other researchers have also said that, yeah, but the thing is like not all dyslexic children and adults have auditory deficits. And this is probably also a methodological issue. Auditory deficit likely co-occur with the insufficient cognitive abilities. You will see very, very soon, the way researchers measure auditory processing may induce other cognitive abilities. So if you don't do well in auditory processing tests, that also means you may not have a great executive function skills or a poor memory and so on. So it's just not about auditory precision only, maybe something else beyond that too. So now researchers, again, including myself, are trying to generalize this framework to the second language acquisition. So here, using the aptitude framework in SLA that I presented earlier, I'm going to propose the 4 different new aptitude constructs related to auditory processing abilities. So number 1, the formant acuity, which I think is relevant more about the segmental learning, but 2 different modes, explicit and implicit. Okay, the third one is the prosodic acuity, which I think is more relevant to the suprasegmental learning, and 2 different modes, explicit and implicit. So let me walk you through what they actually are. And here I would like to check your auditory aptitude as well. Very exciting moments. Yeah? Okay, so let's start with the explicit and formant acuity. So this is a very classic AXB discrimination task. You're going to hear 3 different synthesized sounds in a sequence. And then all you're supposed to do is tell me which one is different, either first one or third one. There's 1 different sound among 3. And the trick here is we prepared hundreds, researchers likely prepared 100 or 200 synthesized sounds, which all identical in acoustic properties except 1. So in this case, second formant. So this case, second formant ranges from like 1,500 to 1,700 hertz with an increment of 2 hertz. On average, humans can perceive the difference in 50 hertz. Yeah. But some individuals can hear very subtle difference. So this test is really about how subtle acoustic difference in F2, in this case, you can hear. Okay. So let's begin and see how far you can go. Okay, so I'm going to play. Let me know which one is different. John, can you hear it? Okay, cool. The answer is 3. Let's move on to the next one. The answer is 1. So the first one, the difference was 110 hertz. The next one is a 50 hertz. And the 50 hertz is a human average. So now let's move on to question 3. Among probably more than 500 individuals I tested, the very few who could actually hear this level of difference. The answer is 3. Here the difference was only 6 hertz. So what does that mean? If you actually have a very good formant acuity, what does this mean? So some emerging evidence showing that you probably you can excel when it comes to learning segmentals and vowels, for example. So here's some interesting reference for that. Let's move on to the explicit, the pitch acuity. So this time, again, we prepared a lot of synthesized sounds, and this time these synthesized sounds differ only in terms of fundamental frequency, F0. So this time F0 differing between 330 30 and 360. So increment here is only 0.3 hertz. On average, humans can perceive 5 hertz, but some extremely sensitized individuals can hear even 1.4 hertz. Let's move on. Let's see how far you can hear. Question 1. The answer is 3. Difference here is 16.5. Let's move on to question 2. The answer is the answer is 1. So here the difference is 7.5. This is the human average. Now let's move on to the question 3. Again, there are very few individuals among 400 participants I saw, they were able to hear this amount of difference. The answer is 1. The difference here was only 1 hertz. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's say you may not have a good format acuity, but you have actually very good prosthetic acuity. So what does that mean? Obviously, you may be very good at picking up new sounds, but especially learning a tonal language such as Cantonese. So here's a very unique, interesting research just published in JASA. Okay, so let's move on to the next section of my talk. So now I'd like to introduce some of my team's recent projects, because we have got this idea that, okay, but how about the achievements of the high-level second language speech proficiency? So obviously, you need a lot of experience. You need years of foreign language education, and also you need to go to the second language speaking environment, spending years there. But not only that, it would be nice to have such explicit format and a prosthetic acuity. But on the top of that, it would be fantastic to have a greater implicit auditory processing ability, because in this way, you're able to process and incorporate auditory input like 24/7, even when you're not aware of it. So now everyone may be wondering, so what is this like, implicit auditory processing? So to measure how the brain reacts to the acoustic properties or temporal spectral properties of the sounds, we use EEG to see how these brain reactions happening at subcortical level before awareness, so even touching the awareness. So the paradigm we're using is that there are several different paradigms. So one that we are using is called frequency following response. And this is what the test looks like. So as you can see here, usually I'm the very first participant whenever my team does any kind of project to make sure that our students are following the procedure well. And so also, as you can see there, though, it's very simple. That I put only like 5 electrons on my head, that's it. And then also what you do is very simple too. All you're supposed to do is just bring your favorite books and magazines that you want to read for pleasure. And you come to our lab and spending 30, 40 minutes just reading them. That's it. But here's the trick. You have to put the headset on and you have to listen to this synthesized sounds, da. And here's the acoustic parameter of this synthesized sound. You can hear like that. Then, but this will be played 6,000 times for 20 minutes nonstop like this. Okay. So what's really cool about this EEG paradigm is that it will allow us to look at exactly how participants' brains react to the certain regions of acoustic signals in that synthesized sound. So for example, your reactions towards a little bit higher frequency information such as F2 or F1, finally lower frequency information such as F0. So now let's talk about this. If you have a greater implicit auditory acuity, so what does it mean? And we hypothesize that it will predict the incidence of a very much high level of second language speech proficiency in naturalistic settings. to test this, we have been recruiting a bunch of second language speakers of English, more than 400 Polish, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese learners of English in various settings, classroom learners as well as the immersion, long-term residents. And the length of residence in second language speaking environment widely varied from 0 to 20 years. And if they had any overseas experience, they must have arrived in a second language environment after the age of 17, meaning all of these participants are late bilinguals. So they do speak English, but with their detectable L1 accents. And methodology, we check their second language proficiency, not only just the phonology, but also other things, vocabulary and grammar. We are really interested in the, both comprehension and production skills. And we check their auditory profiles, explicit measures as well as implicit measures. And then we also survey the experience profiles, so length of foreign language education, as well as residence in target language speaking environment, and when they started arriving in the second language environments. Analysis is very simple. We put all these variables, experience, auditory processing variables, into a same multiple regression and or mixed effects modeling, and then see which ones can be most strongly related to their outcomes. And let me present to you the snapshot, overall patterns of our findings. So not really surprisingly at all, that obviously how long they have been in second language environment really matters. That factor explains 10 to 20% of the variances in outcomes, and also how much they were using the second language English at the time of the project. Obviously that matters, 10 to 20% of the variances. But very interestingly, the primary first predictor was actually auditory processing. So how much they were able to hear well, that was the #1 predictor. And more recently, though, we even moved on and recruited the 70 Japanese EFL students. And at this time, we checked not only the auditory processing, but also their cognitive abilities, such as phonological short-term memory, complex working memory, and paired associates for decorative memory, and serial reaction time for procedural memory. And we checked their second language proficiency, speech proficiency, perception, production. And the findings, not surprisingly, again, all these variables, auditory processing, cognitive variables, were somewhat related to various areas of second language speech proficiency. But this is really interesting to us. But when we ran the factor analysis, it was found that the auditory processing and the explicit cognitive abilities, phonological short-term memory, working memory, and procedural decorative memory, were clustered into 2 different categories. This means auditory processing, explicit cognitive abilities tap into 2 different dimensions of perceptual cognitive abilities. Therefore, here's a tentative summary. Auditory perception skills are relatively independent constructs compared to other cognitive abilities, and then it could serve as a moderate to strong determinant of the post-pubertal L2 acquisition. And very recently, we have just published a synthesis paper on this topic in language learning. Okay, so especially young researchers, I'm pretty sure you must be wondering, okay, all right, Kazuya, yeah, I understand. All right, cool. So processing matters, and okay, we should really think about it as another construct of aptitude. But how can I use it in my research? Like, where can I find it? Right. Good news. So auditory processing tests will be available to you very, very soon. My team, especially my colleague Adam Tinnery, we've been working nonstop, and materials have been already coded in HTML and JavaScript so that they can be run offline for anyone's computer. So it's going to be explicit auditory processing ability test, so AXP discrimination, and it can be saved as a zip file, and then therefore you can download and use everywhere by using your computer with your participants. And we will release this very, very soon. And we're thinking of disseminating via social media, and we're also thinking of writing a method paper on this topic. So please keep an eye on this. And so future directions. So auditory processing is an interesting construct of aptitude. So what would be the next step? there are a lot of possibilities. And then today I would like to just share some of the ongoing projects that our team has been working on. The first project is the aptitude treatment interaction. You may be already familiar with this paradigm, aptitude treatment interaction. And following this paradigm in SLA, our team has also hypothesized that if you have a greater explicit auditory aptitude, that means that you may benefit more from explicit training. The other way around for implicit aptitude, if you have that, probably you may be better fit for incidental or implicit training. We have been doing this project all online because of the COVID, and particularly targeting Japanese speakers of English. And let me present to you the one of the very famous influential paradigms in L2 speech, explicit speech training. This is called high variability phonetic training. And this time, the target contrast is the central vowel a versus low front vowel a, ha, and hat. Actually, Professor Romano's work is very well known for this topic too. And basically, you hear memo pairs, bunch of memo pairs produced by a bunch of different native speakers. And all you're asked to do is to do this identification task, and followed by trial feedbacks. So let's see how it goes. Again, this is all in Japanese. So as you can see here, for every trial, you can get a feedback accuracy. But not only that, you can also get the feedback on speed. Therefore, you're basically being encouraged to be accurate and fluent, meaning automatized. So again, so if you have a greater explicit aptitude, that means you can make better use of this such explicit training. But how about the implicit aptitude? Okay, so what is it this like incidental implicit training that you can more greatly benefit from? And actually, I must say the incidental implicit speech training is not well studied yet. But so our team has been working on this topic, and it's called the video gaming paradigm. And so all the participants have to do is first of all download this game onto their app, their smartphone, and use this app. And this game is called clay shooting. And all you have to do is very simple. It's a clay shooting game. Therefore, whenever you see the target popping up on your smartphone screen, you have to use your finger to shoot it. But the trick here is as fast as possible, so that you can get more points. So let's see how it goes.
Hey. Hat. Hat. Ha. Ha.
Ha. Hit. Ha.
Heck. Ha.
Hat.
Hick.
So you may have noticed. So in order to do this game very well, so gaining more points, you may have noticed that every target has a unique color and a unique movement, also unique sound. So right before each target pops up on the screen, it is linked to some of these English sounds. So e, a, and first two sounds for Japanese participants, very easy to discriminate because both of them, their counterparts exist in Japanese. But the target contrast here is a versus a. And central vowel, low front vowels, this distinction does not exist in Japanese. So in order to do this game well and get this target as fast as possible, you may be guided to pay more attention to the discrimination of these two target vowel sounds. In this way, you can learn this target phonological contrast as a byproduct. So, so that's incidental training. The I would like to introduce another project, one more project to you. And this could be a very exploratory, sounds very exploratory, and even for some of you, very controversial. So I want to see how you would react to this. But this is called auditory training. If auditory processing matters, then our obvious question, the logical sequence is like, why not enhance it? So we came up with this idea that, okay, let's train the aptitude. But if you pay attention to the hearing research, then there are some studies showing that a few hours of training could actually enhance various dimensions of auditory processing among children with language disorders, such as formant acuity and prosthetic acuity. So this is a very good news. So let's apply this to the adult second language speakers. So again, we targeted the more than 100 Japanese students. So because of COVID, we have had to do this all online. And so these participants divided into 3 groups. So phonetic training and auditory training and a combination of both. So they spend 30 minutes every day and times 6, so meaning for a week. And after that, they come back to our lab and then they take a post test and see which group can outperform the others. So in terms of the language, phonetic training, as you saw earlier, we used explicit phonetic training, high variability phonetic training. So the target sound contrast was central vowel and low front vowel. Then this is a new thing, auditory training. So let me show you, this is exactly how it works. And please remember the AXP discrimination task that I used to check your auditory processing, explicit auditory processing abilities. So this time though, it comes with feedback. So let's take a look. As you can see here, you can get the feedback. So whether your answer was correct or wrong, but not only that, can you see this? So you're also given some information, overall information about where you are in terms of your global acuity out of 100. So now you're 35. And after the training, you'll be able to get, okay, see, so what percentage you have got correct answers and also your global acuity level. Okay, so we're still analyzing the data. So today I'm just going to present to you the some emerging patterns. Very interestingly, phonetic training, because we gave them very explicit training, it's a very classic pattern. So over the first 3 days, so much improvement, but then later followed by some kind of a plateau or a great deal of individual variation. So some continue to improve, others just remain some kind of same. But when it comes to auditory training, however, we found something slightly different. Okay, so the improvement was really slow and gradual, but throughout the project. So the more training basically led to the more gains in auditory precision. So so far, here's this some kind of overall tentative pattern. So if you receive phonetic training, you can improve your phonological proficiency. If you receive only auditory training, then you can improve auditory acuity. But there's no, there isn't much the transfer. But if you engage in both phonetic training and auditory training, you can actually improve both. And it seems to me that the gains are larger for the combination group. Okay, so let's move on to the conclusion of my talk. Very first of all, I would like to emphasize that everyone can, so obviously including myself, everyone can learn new sounds and new language as long as we practice, as long as we're motivated, as long as we spend enough time. And despite your detectable accents, L1 rated accents, you can become a very functional language user, being very comprehensible, intelligible, and communicative adequate. But in order to attain very much high level L2 speech proficiency, something slightly beyond experience may be needed, such as the aptitude. And then in this talk, I have been introducing you to this paradigm. Certain individuals with a good ear, more precise auditory processing abilities make the most of every practice opportunity, resulting in high-level L2 proficiency in the long run. In the future directions, I have introduced two possibilities. One is to provide a profile-matched instruction. So if your students are diagnosed to be better at the explicit aptitude, then explicit training may be a better fit, and the other way around is for the implicit aptitude. And probably what I actually really want to explore more about is the second possibility. How about improve both the language and hearing abilities at the same time? And because especially if we receive a language training, we can easily reach the plateau. And therefore, after that, probably it's interesting to engage in both, not only language, but also the hearing auditory training. Okay. And before I end, I have something that I really want everyone to think about. I mean, for all SLA researchers, obviously some of you are interested in aptitude, but others are not really interested in aptitude. But everyone, I'd like you to think about this takeaway message. Just last week, I asked some of my friends in Japan, non-linguists, to do the auditory processing, the auditory discrimination task. And then one of my friends came back to me and he said that, Kazuya, oh my goodness, I got 100% accuracy. According to him, he can hear everything. I don't know what that means, but he said that he was able to hear everything. He said that, wow, exciting. So as a researcher, what should we say to him? If you or me, what would you say to him? Or as a friend, I said, genius, you're genius. You must be talented. So you should really learn English or any kind of second language, Chinese or Korean. It's good for you. But obviously, higher auditory processing may not always guarantee the high-level L2 proficiency, because it's obvious. Because even if you have a very good auditory processing abilities, but then there are so many other variables that could interact to determine so-called high-level second language attainments. But what I really want you to think about is, what if your participants, second language students, learners, lack precise auditory processing? So it's fantastic if you have very good auditory processing, that's good, genius, that's fine. But then how about the other way around? If your participants are diagnosed or found to have relatively less auditory precision, this could be something that we should really think about, because it may greatly hinder the rest of L2 acquisition process. Because as you remember, auditory processing is the beginning of everything. There's so many things involved in second language acquisition, but auditory precision is the very beginning. So if you have problems here, though, it will affect the rest of the process, regardless of ample practice opportunities, high motivation, and great memory and control. So what I would like to suggest today is for everyone, in order to help all learners equally learn a second language, auditory processing should be considered in everyone's SLA work. And this could be something that I also really want to further delve into, especially thinking of the possibility of auditory processing training. So finally, I'd like to thank the funders that helped us conduct complete and all these projects. And again, pending the conference organizer approval, but I'd like to share the video recording on YouTube. And also, if you are interested in some of the references, I have put the information there. So please just go and download it. So thank you so much for your attention and listening. And I'm truly looking forward to the questions coming from you. And again, we can, if after this, we can communicate through email, or you can communicate with me through social media. I'll be there all the time. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kazuya, for a very interesting and inspiring presentation. I will be in charge of reading the questions that come from the audience out loud to you. So I just need a minute to access this. Hold on a second.
Yeah, take your time. Audience, Professor John Moore and I have been working a lot of projects on this topic too. So I'm very happy that I was able to share the latest everything with John.
Okay.
Let's check.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Q&A.
Yeah. I'm also gonna check in and see if I can also see these questions.
All right. So okay. So here's a first question by Marie Junod. She's asking, you mentioned the importance of temporal sensitivity. Do you mean the ability to perceive and produce rhythm?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And today, one thing I didn't really mention is the temporal acuity. Yeah, temporal acuity is a rhythm. Yeah, and the duration and intensity. So that's the another ability that could be related to the fluency. But this topic is still like subject to more investigation. So I intentionally avoided talking about the temporal acuity. So yeah, she's definitely right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Another question from Roger Gilabert. How stable is our auditory acuity throughout the day? Is it the same to have a group of primary school children take your test at 9 in the morning when they come to class, as it would be towards the end of the school day when they're tired and unfocused?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot. Good question. Yeah, that's really the issue here. So remember, if you measure the auditory processing through the explicit behavioral tasks, such as AXB discrimination, it's obvious that kids, it really depends on their attentional span. If they find it to be fun, then they'll do it. But if they find it to be really torturous, then they won't do it seriously. But first of all, the behavioral task is carefully designed so that we try to avoid any chance level. And we are, as I said, we're thinking of writing a method paper precisely because we're currently conducting the reliability, test-retest reliability study. And then so first of all, test-retest reliability is quite high, even if it's done on online, especially because the program is carefully designed that way. But we're always dealing with adults, but when it comes to kids, yes. And the psycholinguistics research has definitely shown that, yeah, so kids who don't do well, but they also have issues with like executive functions and because of the test modality and things like that. So probably adults, the performance is quite stable. But for kids, yeah, it's definitely controversial. And then, yeah, and we need to make sure that the kids are actually doing it right. So.
All right. So there are 2 or 3 questions on asking whether you could comment on the relationship between speech perception and speech production and whether one translates directly into the other.
Yeah, again, thanks. That's another question that I'm really interested in. And obviously, there are a lot of theories on that. And Charlie Nagel, I think he's going to publish, I think, this paper on this topic, a really good one in EuroSLA very, very soon, or it has been already published. But anyway, so obviously there's so many issues here. But one thing that I would like to contribute today is that for this auditory processing, there is another skill that I haven't really presented today, but there's one other skill which is called audio motor integration. So today was really about the abilities to perceive subtle difference in acoustic signals. So how far, how acute, how sensitive you are. But there's another ability called integration. So you hear something and you immediately translate it into the action. It's called auditory motor integration ability. Again, if you come to this, my paper in language learning 2021 is published there, there's another one. This ability seems to be really important to make sure help transfer what you can hear into your motor action for obvious reasons. And I'm pretty sure, John, you may have a couple of things to say about this, because John published a paper with Professor Dijon about articulately talents. And that's another thing that I'm also interested in. So there are a lot of talents which are also integral to the transfer of your perceptual knowledge to productive knowledge. And yeah, so, and then obviously, if you want to talk about fluency, then that kind of skills, in my view, and according to my preliminary findings, this is the thing that really matters for fluency.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Judith Corbin is asking whether you think auditory processing plays a similarly important role in comprehensibility as in pronunciation.
Yeah.
And whether you can say something about its potential for listening comprehension.
Excellent. Thank you so much. First of all, as for the first one, the link between auditory processing and comprehensibility, I must say, this is very important to emphasize. Comprehensibility, you know about the other one called the native likeness. So pronunciation can be judged comprehensible or native-like. And when it comes to comprehensibility, auditory processing kind of matters, but in the end, as long as you practice, as long as you have a great motivation, as long as you're committed to it, you will be comprehensible. You will be a functional user of second language. Yeah. So comprehensibility, auditory processing, the link is weak. But when it comes to native-like pronunciation attainment, here we go. Then, unfortunately, auditory processing really matters. So if you have it, then you have a great advantage. I don't know how much it matters if you attaining native-like pronunciation, but comprehensibility message is that the aptitude is actually quite weak there. And then the next question, John, sorry, next question is about listening comprehension, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, listening comprehension. Yes. It depends on how much you want to comprehend, right? Yeah. So according to listening literature, okay, you understand 95% of what's going on. That's fine. It's called functional listener. You're good enough. Then maybe super good auditory processing ability may not really be needed. But if you want to be a very good listener, like you understand almost 99% of the content, then you want to have something like that. But at the very same time, throughout this talk, or maybe in the end, I emphasize that having a good ear is really important. But if you have a poor ear, probably that could be an issue, because that may impede the even comprehensibility attainments, or development of like a good enough listening skills that may be hindered if you don't have certain level of auditory threshold. Thanks. Yeah.
Right. Julie Thebrian has a clarification question. He says, in the example you showed us comparing phonetic training and auditory training, the former was on a segmental level, but I think the auditory training was on prosodic acuity, pitch differences. In any case, should we make a distinction between auditory and prosodic acuity training, or can both have an effect on segmental and suprasegmental learning?
Yeah, Julie, thank you so much for your clarification question. Because let me double check though. But what you heard about auditory training was actually because we carefully manipulated the F2 of the synthesized sounds. These sounds don't sound like the vocalic sounds, but I think we created a synthetic sounds, but F2 were just different. So that auditory training was actually about F2 discrimination, and low front vowel a versus mid vowel or the difference. There are a lot of acoustic differences, but one key factor is F2, right? So I think we matched them together. So the F2 difference for the phonetic training, A versus R, and F2 difference discrimination for the synthesized sounds in auditory training. Yeah, but it is really important to make a distinction. Are you targeting the prosodies F0 and then also suprasegmental learning, or are you really talking about segmental learning? And then this is more relevant to performance level acuities. Yeah, thanks, Julie.
Thank you. There are still a few more questions. I think we have we can use a little bit more of time if that's okay with you.
Sure,
So,
totally fine. Yeah, I love this thing. So yeah.
Sharka Simakova is asking whether the ability to hear and remember sounds in a sequence, as when you encounter a new word in a language, is also part of having a good ear.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So today I made it a little bit simplified. So auditory processing is one construct, and it serves the beginning of everything. But at the very same time, as you can see, though, depending on how you measure it, depending on how obviously broadly define it, it includes several other neighboring abilities. So as I said earlier, that if you want to talk about the audio motor integration ability, you hear something and you're asked to do something with it. For example, you remember these sounds and you repeat them again or something like that. Then of course includes several other things, like not just about auditory acuity, but also control, attention, and things like that. So yes, auditory processing is actually a very broad term, including not just about pure perceptual ability, but also other neighboring cognitive abilities. So as you said, actually auditory, we are also interested in using this auditory processing aptitude test to check how much it actually produces the vocabulary acquisition. In this case, highly recommend prosodic acuity. The prosodic processing abilities may be relevant to that. And we have some emerging evidence, but I highly recommend more researchers tackle on this. And I do know some existing literature on this topic. Prosody really matters for vocabulary. So, yeah.
Thank you. Still more questions from
Sure.
Carmen Perez. Could you say a bit more about learners who may have high aptitude, but like above average aptitude, but yet their general language proficiency, maybe at school, may not be so high?
Ah, I see. Yeah, again, it really depends on how you measure it. Because remember though, imagine like you have let's say you have a very high level of formal acuity. Oh my goodness, you're actually able to hear 5 hertz to, even 5 hertz difference in, let's say, F2 or F3 or whatever. Then, well, what does that mean? So then you may perform very well when you're talking about vowels and certain consonants, right? It may not mean that you're actually very, very fluent, because the formal acuity is not that so relevant to the fluency per se. So depending on what kind of language proficiency you're mentioning, and also depending on what kind of aptitude you're talking about, probably there's some unique relationship there. So if you just define super good second language proficiency as segmental accuracy, then it's good to link it to the formant acuity. Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting new direction of aptitude research. It's just not like a global like MLAT thing, like you get the total score versus like you compare against like a school grade. I think that's a little bit it's interesting to do that way, probably as a first step, but maybe as a researcher, we can be more interested in like a fine-grained level match between aptitude type and the language proficiency type. Thank you, though. Thank you so much for that question.
Still another question. Florent Dome is asking whether you could somehow summarize any links that you had found between auditory discrimination and speech production in a second language.
Yeah, excellent. So as I mentioned earlier, first of all, within the auditory processing, there are two things. One is the acuity. The other one I didn't really present today is the integration. So acuity and motor action. And when it comes to speech production, we found that auditory acuity is the most important component, but it does not necessarily mean it's about everything. It's also about motor integration. So second predictor is the motor integration. Yeah, and sorry, I haven't really introduced you to what this is about the motor integration, but for example, like you listen to the patterns and I ask you to repeat. And we're trying to see exactly how accurately you can reproduce. So that's one thing called the audio motor integration, especially rhythm. But anyway, so these two things matter, but more weight on the acuity than on the integration.
Thank you. There's a question from Kiwamu Kasahara. Asking, do you think that anybody can benefit from this training, from auditory training? And is it the case that the more training, the better?
Yeah, when it comes to language training, as everyone knows, if you have ever taught, it's not necessarily the more is better. Sometimes your students or yourself will hit the plateau very quickly. But when it comes to auditory training, as you can see, though, there's so much room for us to improve. Huge amount of individual variation. So we're definitely interested in testing it. But more importantly, what I want to emphasize is that there are some limited studies showing that if you actually don't have threshold auditory acuity, you may not benefit from like a training. So auditory processing is important also in the sense that we need to check if your participants actually have reached, or students have reached a certain threshold. For those people, it's very important to provide auditory training so that they can reach the threshold. Yes, maybe that's another interesting direction that we can further pursue. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think we are 3-4 minutes away from next sessions that will be starting soon. I would like to thank you again, Professor Saito, for a very interesting talk. And I would also like to thank the audience for their questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, John. Everyone's, if you still have questions, please keep in touch with me, email or social media, especially young researchers, possibilities to collaborate. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and bye-bye.